That the biggest argument at the holiday dinner table was whether the turkey was too dry or who was going to do the dishes. But recently, we've seen a shift. We're seeing empty chairs. We're seeing invitations declined, not because of travel costs or scheduling conflicts, but because of who voted for whom. Today, we're looking at a phenomenon that feels uniquely modern but strikes at something very old: the breaking of family bonds over political ideology. We're asking why we've let cable news and social media algorithms dictate who we break bread with, and how we can maybe, just maybe, find our way back to the table.
The premise here isn't just that we disagree. It's that the disagreement has become an existential threat to the family unit itself. The listener who suggested this topic put it pretty bluntly. They feel people are being gaslighted by the media into overreacting without facts, and that we need to return to independent thinking to bring families back together. That is a heavy charge.
It is a heavy charge, Noah, but the data suggests it's a very real one. We are in a moment of what sociologists call affective polarization. That's different from just disagreeing on policy. Policy disagreement is, I think taxes should be lower. Affective polarization is, I think you are a bad person because you think taxes should be lower. And that shift from you're wrong to you're evil is exactly what makes sitting down for a holiday meal feel impossible for so many people.
Right? It transforms a political preference into a moral indictment. But is this actually happening at scale, or is this just a few loud stories on Twitter?
It is happening at scale. A study published in the journal Science actually tracked smartphone data over Thanksgiving dinners. They found that families from opposing political precincts spent between 30 to 50 minutes less time together than politically aligned families. That is a measurable reduction in family time purely based on political geography. And Reuters Ipsos polling has consistently shown that a significant minority of Americans, around 15 to 20%, have stopped talking to a family member entirely because of politics. So those empty chairs you mentioned, they are statistically real.
30 to 50 minutes less time. That's basically skipping dessert and rushing out the door. That is profound. But let's dig into the why. The listener mentioned media influence and gaslighting. Is it fair to say that the media is the primary architect of this split?
I think architect might be giving them too much credit for a complex blueprint, but they are certainly the fuel suppliers. If we look at the media landscape technically, we have moved from a broadcasting model to a narrowcasting model. In the Walter Cronkite era, you had a shared baseline of reality. Today, the business model of cable news, and more aggressively, social media algorithms, is predicated on engagement, and the emotion that drives the highest engagement is outrage.
Anger keeps you watching.
Precisely. It's what's known as the outrage industrial complex. When you consume media that constantly frames the other side, not just as opposition, but as an existential threat to your way of life, your brain's threat detection systems go online. You enter a fight or flight mode. So when your uncle or your cousin brings up a talking point from that other side, your brain doesn't hear an opinion, it hears a threat.
That connects directly to the gaslighting the listener mentioned. If you are constantly told that the world is ending if the other guy wins, then reacting calmly seems irrational. You feel like you have to overreact.
Exactly. If you truly believe the narrative that your political opponent is trying to destroy the country, then cutting off family members doesn't feel like an overreaction. It feels like moral hygiene. It feels like self-preservation. But here is the critical missing piece. Often, the facts driving that fear are either decontextualized or outright false. We are seeing people make permanent decisions about their relationships based on temporary, often exaggerated news cycles.
Pause on that. Permanent decisions based on temporary news cycles. That is tragic. We're talking about ending a 20-year relationship with a sibling over a headline that might be debunked or forgotten in 3 weeks.
And that is where the listener's point about independent thinking becomes crucial. Independent thinking, in this context, means the ability to separate the person from the consumption profile. It means asking, does my aunt actually believe in destroying democracy, or is she just worried about inflation and consuming a specific news channel that links the two?
So how do we break that cycle? Because it's easy to say, think independently, but when you're in the heat of the moment and someone says something you find abhorrent, the biology takes over.
We have to look at the historical context of how we got here to find the way out. This isn't the first time America has been divided. The Civil War obviously split families. The Vietnam War era created a massive generational divide, the generation gap. But in those eras, there were still mediating institutions. You still went to the same churches, the same bowling leagues, the same Rotary clubs. Today, we have sorted ourselves geographically and socially. We live in bubbles.
So we don't just vote differently, we live differently. We don't bump into the other side at the grocery store anymore.
Right. This represents the great sort. And because we don't interact with the other in low-stakes environments, the only time we encounter them is in high-stakes environments, like a holiday dinner where everyone is stressed, maybe there's alcohol involved, and the expectations are high. It's a powder keg.
I want to challenge the idea that this is purely about media brainwashing, though. Isn't it possible that some of these divides are genuine moral disagreements? If a family member holds a view that I find fundamentally harmful to my existence or the existence of people I love, isn't independent thinking leading me to cut them off?
That is the nuance we have to grapple with. It is absolutely valid to set boundaries around toxic behavior. If a family member is abusive or hateful, politics is often just the delivery mechanism for that abuse. But what we are seeing frequently is not cutting off someone because of their behavior toward you, but cutting them off because of who they voted for, regardless of how they treat you personally. That is the distinction.
The distinction between behavior and affiliation.
Yes, if your brother helps you move house, lends you money when you're broke, and is kind to your kids, but checks a different box on a ballot, cutting him off is a triumph of abstract ideology over tangible reality. You are prioritizing the signal from the media over the signal from your own life experience.
That is a powerful way to frame it. Abstract ideology versus tangible reality. The listener mentioned no factual backing. I think this is where the media literacy piece comes in. How often are these fights started over things that simply aren't true?
Constantly. There is a concept called conflict entrepreneurs. These are media personalities or influencers whose literal job is to take a small grain of truth, strip away the context, and weaponize it to make you angry. For example, you might hear a story that School District X is banning the American flag. You get to dinner, you scream at your niece who is a teacher. But if you did the independent research, checked the primary source, you might find that one specific classroom was being painted that day, but the damage to the relationship is already done.
So the solution requires a level of humility. It requires checking our own sources before we load the cannon.
It requires what intellectual humility researchers call cognitive friction. We have to slow down. When you hear something that confirms your bias and makes you angry, that is exactly when you should trust it the least. The listener's call for independent thinking is really a call for slowing down our reaction times.
Let's talk about the path forward. How do we actually bring families back together? If you've already skipped Christmas for 2 years, how do you break the ice without it turning into a debate immediately?
There is a technique used in conflict resolution called complicating the narrative. Usually we want to simplify. I am right, you are wrong. To reconnect, you have to do the opposite. You have to ask questions that force nuance. Instead of asking, how could you vote for X, you ask, what is the thing you are most worried about for the country right now?
That shifts the focus from the politician, who is the lightning rod, to the underlying fear or value.
Exactly. Usually the fear is universal. I'm worried about my kid's future. I'm worried about safety. I'm worried about affording groceries. Once you find that shared anxiety, you realize you are both trying to solve the same problem. You just bought different solutions. That is the human connection.
And that feels like the antidote to the gaslighting. The media tells you the other side hates America. When you sit down and hear they are just worried about their pension, the media narrative collapses.
It crumbles instantly. Real-world contact is the kryptonite to polarization. That is why the holiday table is so important. It is one of the last few places where we are forced to look at the humanity of the people we disagree with. If we abandon that table, we are ceding our family life to political consultants.
Ceding our family life to political consultants. That is a chilling image. But I want to play devil's advocate one more time. What if the independent thinking leads you to the conclusion that the values are just too different? Is bringing families back together always the right goal?
It's a fair push. Not every relationship is salvageable, and unity shouldn't mean submission. You don't have to agree. You don't even have to respect the opinion. The goal isn't consensus. The goal is containment. Can we contain the disagreement so that it doesn't consume the entire relationship? Can we agree that our shared history as siblings is more valuable than our current disagreement on tax policy?
So it's about hierarchy of values, placing the family bond above the political identity.
And realizing that political identities are remarkably fluid. People change, parties change, platforms flip-flop. Family is, or should be, the permanent structure. If you burn a bridge today over a policy that will be obsolete in 4 years, you are left with the ashes of a relationship for the rest of your life.
That brings us back to the listener's point about overreacting. The overreaction is treating the temporary as permanent.
In treating the complex as simple, independent thinking means embracing complexity. It means saying, I love you. I think you are wrong about this, but pass the potatoes. That is actually a radical act of resistance against a media ecosystem that wants you to be angry and isolated.
It's funny, we think of resistance as marching or protesting, but in 2024, resistance might just be eating dinner with your dad without checking your phone.
It really might be. And for anyone listening who is nodding along but thinking, I can't do it, they are too far gone, try this. Do not talk about the news. Talk about memories. Nostalgia is a powerful bonding agent. Remind them of who you were before the algorithms got a hold of you both.
That's a great practical tip. Lean into the shared history.
And verify before you vilify. If a relative says something wild, don't snap. Ask, where did you hear that? Not in a gotcha way, but in a curious way. Sometimes just having to explain the source makes people realize how shaky it is.
This has been a really necessary conversation. It's clear that while the media landscape has weaponized our differences, we still hold the keys to our own front doors. We can choose who we let in, and we can choose to engage with the person, not the talking point.
The listener wanted us to stop the overreaction and bring families back together. I think the takeaway here is that it starts with refusing to let external narratives define our internal relationships. It starts with being an independent thinker who values flesh and blood over pixels and posts. If this episode made you think of a family member you've drifted from, maybe send it to them as a peace offering, or just give them a call.